Let's get started. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and students, it is a great honor for the University of Mainz and for Socum to having won over Zygmunt Bauman for the Georg Forster Lecture 2014. It certainly is no overstatement to say that Zygmunt Bauman has been among the most important and most influential European sociologists and social theorists for many decades. Grown up in Poznan, he fled with his family at the age of 14 from the German invading forces in 1939 into the Soviet Union. Yet he returned as a member of the first Polish army, which was part of the Soviet army that liberated Poland and Germany. After 1945, he first started a military career, then studied sociology, in which he also did his PhD and habilitated. In 1968, he emigrated to Israel after repeatedly having been confronted with anti-Semitism in Poland. From 1971 to 1999, Zygmunt Bauman taught and did research at the University of Leeds in the UK, where he held a chair of sociology. Thus, Zygmunt Bauman traveled from east to west, it is from post-Stalinist Poland into the modern or rather postmodern culture of the West. The specific transformation of these societies, the analysis and their dynamics and uncertain developments have influenced his work fundamentally. So one can say that Zygmunt Bauman represents the lived experience of the European history in the 20th century. He published, and this is very impressive, stunning 60 books, more than 100 articles about the Shoah and the totalitarian states, on modernity and postmodernism, on globalization and consumer society. I just named some titles and topics. Culture as Practice, a book published in 1973, Modernity and the Holocaust in 1989, a German translation, Dialektik der Ordnung 1992. 1991, Modernity and Ambivalence, die deutsche Übersetzung, Moderne und Ambivalenz. 2000 Liquid Modernity, im Surkamp Verlag erschienen als flüchtige Moderne. In 2007 Consuming Life, auch übersetzt ins deutsche Leben als Konsum. In terms of Holocaust research, he proposes to see the Holocaust, and I quote, as a rare yet significant and reliable test of the hidden possibilities of modern society, end of quote. Based on a modern understanding of the shapeability of nature and society, the Holocaust can be seen as a project of social engineering. It is organized and carried out, among other components, by a modern bureaucracy and through functional division of labor. Bauman diagnoses an, and I quote, elective affinity between Holocaust and modernity. And he asserts, I quote, we are living in a type of society that does not include any elements which were able to prevent the Holocaust, end of quote. Characteristic for postmodernism, which Zygmunt Bauman analyzed and described as one of the first sociologists, is the ambivalence and the contingency of social life. The ambivalence has now been privatized, its reduction no more an issue for society or the state. Competing claims on truthfulness, the disintegration of inherited identities, and the liquefaction of social forms determine the fragmented context of postmodernism. In this context, the postmodern self is, according to Zygmunt Bauman, searching for non-trivial sources of acknowledgement. In his more recent work, he criticizes a tendency to increase one's own value through consumption. This illusion of personal happiness gives in to the promises choreographed by products, marketing, and corporations. The result is an obligation to consume, since working on one's own identity and body demands continuous attention and concern. These are only few examples to show to which extent Zygmunt Bauman has enriched and molded discourses in the social science as a critical mind. In 1992, Zygmunt Bauman was awarded the European Amalfi Prize for Sociology and Social Science. In 1998, he got the Theodore W. Adorno Award, and in 2010, the Príncipe de Asturias Prize for Communication and the Humanities. His presentation today is about the future of citizenship in our society. Mr. Bauman, the floor is yours. We are very happy to have you here and are looking forward for your presentation.
I hope you still remember that a few weeks ago we had elections to European Parliament. I am asking this stupid question not without ground, because our culture, contemporary culture, is not culture of learning, but of forgetting. We forget the titles, the headlines in the newspapers, the news on television serve only one purpose, mostly, and that is the purpose of making you forget the yesterday event, yesterday headlines, and make room for imbibing new parts of the constant flood of information. A few days ago, Radio Times, but a very, very respectable weekly in Britain, with very long tradition of informing and shaping the ideas of the public, announced that British television took a risk and introduced a new regular broadcast about current affairs. And Radio Times commented it like that: a new monthly strand looking at international news in greater depth has to be a good thing. The trouble is, the news agenda moves fast, and when headlines are dominated by Ukraine, Syria, and China, it looks like a missed opportunity to have your first edition focus on Rwanda, Colorado, or Norway. Well, all that was written several days ago. Now we have World Cup, so even the latest information, the hot news of yesterday are not very much in the center of attention. So I am asking this question: do you remember that we had a few weeks ago, the elections to the European Parliament? I wanted to start my presentation from that event. I think it was a very important event. I would like to call it even a hologram event, because in this one day drama, the whole problems which we confront today in the area which is expressed in the title of this lecture could be shown, could be seen, could be shown, could be analyzed. The interesting results of the elections, if you remember, I repeat, was that there was very strong anti-European voice. It was not politically oriented. It was not class ideologically oriented. Jobbik, for example, in Hungary, very strong anti-European party, drew its electors from extreme right-wing forces in the country. But UKIP in Great Britain or National Front in France drew electors equally from right and left of the political arena. In Greece, Syriza again expressed anti-Europeanism in drawing very heavily from the extreme left-wing part of the political spectrum. So to describe, to analyze the lessons of this European election in traditional terms to which we are adjusted, turn to the left or turn to the right, doesn't make much sense. I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that what's happened there, that accumulated anger, accumulated anxiety, accumulated feeling of protest found its outlet, very convenient, very secure outlet. When you elect your national government, then you are very careful. From time to time, you are even looking really into the small print of the political program which party represents in order to influence the policy of the future government. Why? Because you believe that the policy of the future government will influence your own life, your own prospect of your children, the hopes for the future, and so on. Not in election to European Parliament in Brussels and Strasbourg. Very few people in Europe believe that something really important depends on it. So it doesn't matter really who is elected. It does matter, however, that it's a safe, convenient occasion to express anxiety. Well, I think that the best summary of the lessons of these elections were captured by an artist of The Guardian, the English newspaper. There is a cartoon which he produced the day after election. There are 28 people, each one keeping a placard with one inscription, "I am unhappy." I am unhappy. 28 people, 28 members of the European Union, as you know, each one unhappy, but each one unhappy in a different way. What is the common denominator of it? What is behind it? What people are protesting about? It's not protest against any particular government. Left-wing and right-of-center governments were beaten in this election in equal measure. It is rather expression of being made unhappy about the general ambience, the general situation, the conditions under which we are and under which we have to pursue our life goals. A condition of uncertainty. I think that Reinhard Koselleck, the great, unfortunately late German historian of ideas, used a very good metaphor to capture the substance of our present situation. He developed this metaphor in relation to history of Europe just before Enlightenment in 17th, 18th century, but it applies very well to our times as well. Metaphor of mountain pass, mountain pass. Just imagine yourself, you are climbing a very steep slope of the mountains, going up and up and up. It is a steep slope, so you can't very well stop and pitch your tents, or not to mention build your houses, settle there. You have to keep climbing. You can't stand on such a slope because the next strong wind or the next strong rain will just wash you away from there. So you keep climbing. But keeping climbing, you know only one thing, that you can't stay put, that the present status quo is not endurable, not livable with, so you have to go ahead. But you have no idea what is on the other side of the mountain, which you will see only when you arrive to the mountain pass. Now we are more or less in the same situation at the moment. We are on the move. We know where from we are moving, but I don't believe that we have a very clear picture, a very clear image of where to we are moving. Just to pick up another reference of that situation to the condition of Europe, I wonder whether you noticed there was a very interesting discussion in the French newspaper Le Monde between, on the one hand, a very powerful, very influential contemporary French intellectual Alain Finkielkraut, and on the other hand, there was a statement made by Daniel Cohn-Bendit, which you probably know from German politics as well. And the statement, manifesto, you can put it this way, written by him and Guy Verhofstadt together under the title Debut Europe. Europe Rise, Europe Rise. What they suggested is that the very principles, the very nature of the political system which emerged in the last 300 years and became a norm in Europe first, and then through imperialism, colonialism, spread also to other continents as an example to follow. Now the time of that arrangement of our togetherness is over. It can be suspended, it can be continued because it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. That we are facing the decline of what used to be the major entity of political organization in the past few last centuries, namely the nation state, which was, I'll try to develop this topic a moment later, but which was based on the principle of territorial sovereignty. Territorial sovereignty is a very good instrument of assuring independence in a chaotic world, but it is not a very good instrument to cope and to deal and to resolve the issues emerging with the state of interdependence. And we are now under several dozens of years of very hectic globalization of power. We are in a state of interdependence. We are all dependent on each other, but the tools to deal with this situation were developed in order to cope with territorial sovereignty inside the boundaries of one country taken apart, and keep people on the other side of the border away from interference into internal problems of the country. Daniel Bendit and Verhofstadt quote very heavily from very influential, very well-known, very powerful minds like Hannah Arendt, Jürgen Habermas, Ulrich Beck, just trying to present in all its nakedness, the need, the challenge of expanding horizons of our political thinking, and at the same time also to develop the tools of collective action, which would be on a par, made to the measure of the grandiosity and the width of the issues which we are confronting. I would put it this way. I think that what characterizes the present situation is divorce between power and politics. Power and politics. By power, I understand the capability, the ability of having things done. Politics is the capability of deciding which things ought to be done. For the last 2-3 centuries, the general opinion was that both things, politics and power, should be should live in the same household, should concentrated at the level of the nation state. What has happened, however, is that much of the power, of the ability to have things done, the forces, the resources needed to have things done evaporated from the level of nation state into the cyberspace, into the supranational, suprastate space to which the tools of political action available to the heads of the of states do not reach. They are too far. It's a space of flows, global space, which is free from political control. The double effect of this phenomenon is that we are confronted today, on the one hand, with powers which are exempted from political, that means citizen, electoral, democratic control. On the other hand, we have politics which suffers of the constant deficit of power. Good wishing, good willing, not corrupted politicians are very much in the same positions as very nasty types which also try to live out of politics. The same condition because their task, their needs, the expectation of their citizens overgrow their ability to act effectively. And the question is how it happened. I suggest to you how we came where we are at the moment. I suggest to you that it all started just to agree on a pinpoint, a beginning of the process in 1555 in Augsburg. In Augsburg, after several dozens of years of very bloody wars, religious wars, the representatives of the ruling dynasties in Europe came together to Augsburg in 1555 to find a formula which would allow them to stop this massacre and devastation going on through Europe, allegedly in German-speaking part of Europe at that time. 50% of the living residents were killed during the religious wars in Europe. 50%, partly on the battlefields, partly by the demoralized soldiers assaulting their homes, and partly by the epidemics which followed the universal war going in Europe. And they found a formula which is known to you, I hope. It says, cuius regio eius religio. In vulgar translation, simplifying translation, but showing the substance of the idea is that whoever rules the country has the right to dictate the residents of the country in which God they should believe. That was the time of religious wars, so the identities, the decisions about belongingness, about commitment, about engagement in a grouping of people were presented in terms of the religious concept, the kind of God, the kind of liturgy, the kind of church to which people are attached. Well, that was 1555. That was immediately followed by the whole series of analysis of the idea of sovereignty, what sovereign can do, absolute sovereignty, not tolerating any exception from it. The foreigners should keep away from it. It is only the matter for people within the boundaries to decide what they are going to do. Studies by Machiavelli, Jean Baudin were particularly influential. Then in Scotland, Hobbes added his very powerful voice. The idea of territorial sovereignty as the principle on which the human arrangement on the globe should be conducted. But it took almost 100 years more for this formula to sink and be really accepted in the practice of ruling dynasties. Actually, in 1648, another conference, Westphalian, it went down in history as Westphalian settlement, Westphalian agreement, in two other German towns, Osnabrück and Münster. Again, the representatives of ruling dynasties came together, and after almost 100 extra years of mutual massacres, finally they agreed to follow it. That was 1648, I think very important date in the history of modern world. In a sense, it's the starting point because the formula cuius regio eius religio very easily could be, and it indeed was, recycled into the formula of the last 200-300 years of nation building and modern state building, with one very simple operation. Instead of religio, natio. Cuius regio eius natio. People are united within the boundaries by common origin, by common tradition, by common folk's nature, by commonality of language, by commonality of condition, commonality of fate, commonality of prospect. Past and future are together combining into giving meaning into the present of people cohabiting within the framework of the state. Then 200 years later, I think 48 is a very important year for some reasons. 1648 was an important year, and then 1848 again was a very important year, because that was, as you remember, that was the spring of nations. Very important things happened, from the legitimacy of power in terms of king or prince. It was the people. Power was seen as demanded, as shifting from king to the people, beginning combination of the idea of the nation with the idea of democracy. By the way, the pioneer of this idea, long before that, because he died already in 1794, was the person by whose name this cycle of lectures is called, namely Georg Forster. He was co-president of the first democratic republic in the history of Germany, and that was the Mainz Republic. It existed only a few months, but nevertheless created a precedent. And then I already mentioned in 19th century, the huge expansion of European ideas, together with European armies and European tradesmen, embraced virtually all continents of the planet, and the idea of the nation state being the natural unit of human togetherness, a natural political entity in which power and politics combine, was spread over virtually all the globe. After the First World War, Woodrow Wilson, who presided over a peace conference there, proclaimed the nation state as the universal political resolution, so to speak, of the human cohabitation. And what's happened after Second World War? We got United Nations. And have you read the Statute of United Nations, which the people who were instrumental in creating it, brought into existence, hoping that it will prevent the outrageous wars raging over Europe throughout 20th century. In the statute it is written that the task of United Nations is to defend, tooth and nail, defend the indivisible, inalienable sovereignty of every nation state. That is the instrument which we have at our disposal. All instruments were created with the prospect, with the purpose of serving the needs, the interests of the territorially sovereign nation state. But, ladies and gentlemen, our realities are different. They change very, very considerably. I don't think that even most powerful governments of most powerful countries can believe that without any risk they can take decisions within their own state. They must look around, they must consider the worldwide terms of trade, the powers distributed is no connection to, no reference to the local powers. Powers, the most powerful powers, so to speak, powers which probably decide about your choice, your chances of employment, chances of your children and your grandchildren of living in a well-off country, getting good education. All those things are decided by powers which are not under political control. And the other side of the same coin, as I already mentioned, is the state which is weakened. The divorce between power and politics means that every government willy-nilly suffers the deficit of power. The result of it, the reaction to it, are seen all around us since, say, roughly 1970s, in the last century. It's ongoing deregulation, ongoing privatization, outsourcing of certain essential resources for human survival and human welfare, laterally to the market forces, which are by definition non-political. They are not subject to political decisions. The politics should be kept away from the functioning of the market, that the general belief, or they are dropped down. They are dropped down, not laterally, but down to what Anthony Giddens, the English sociologist, called life politics. Life politics is, ladies and gentlemen, the area in which each one of us, as we are sitting here, is at the same time one's own parliament, one's own government, and one's own Supreme Court. We are, as Ulrich Beck keeps repeating, and I subscribe to the same belief, we are expected to find individual solutions using individual means, individual talent, individual wisdom, individual cleverness, and individual resources, individual solutions to socially produce problems. And that is very hard work, as probably everybody found out. There are very good reasons to be angry and to be unhappy and to be uncertain about the future which you would like to secure for your near and dear, for your neighborhood, for your family, for people with whom you live. these processes which I just mentioned are the product of the state being forced, because of the lack of sufficient power to have things done, was forced to abandon functions which until then were considered to be the indivisible property of the state, prerogative of the state. And the state guarded its monopoly on dealing with these issues because it didn't believe that any other agency is able to fulfill the task. Now, the states are characterized by, quite a lot of ingenuity put into shuffling away from the parliament, from the political decisions, from the democratic organs of the state, a right to decide about how, in what way this function will be performed. Privatization reaches, as you know, today areas which were unthinkable in this respect yet 50, 60 years ago. There are private prisons, there are private armies, the private equivalents, quasi-equivalents of the institutions of social welfare, and so on, so on. So, what are the prospects and what the last elections to the European Parliament has taught us? The ways of doing things properly, which we believed are serving precisely this purpose, do not work any longer. The instruments, the tools of action to which we attached our hopes, in which we invested our trust that they are able to solve the issues which torment us, now they don't work any longer properly. But, and that's a very fatal but, the new ways of doing things, of having things done, which would be more effective, more up to the task than the old ones, are at best in the designing stage, but they are hardly ever anywhere put in practice. That is the situation which political philosopher, Italian political philosopher Antonio Gramsci called the state of interregnum. Interregnum, the concept which was first used in the history of Rome ab urbe condita, from the legendary beginning of the city, by Titus Livius, and Titus Livius applied this idea of interregnum to the situation which ruled in Rome after the death of the first king of Rome, legendary king of Rome, Romulus. Romulus allegedly ruled Rome 36 years. 36 years. But not by accident, but by logic of that time of history. The average length of life of Romans at that time was 36 years, which means that when he died, very few Romans remember a time when there was no Romulus, time without Romulus. In the same way as you probably don't remember times without mobile telephones. They didn't remember times without Romulus. Very, very, very confusing situation, because they were used to the fact that all the instruction, all recommendation, all commands were coming from the same place, from the same person, from Romulus. And suddenly there is no Romulus any longer. There's no one to ask what to do. What to do. And it lasted until the next king of Rome, Numa, was appointed. Antonio Gramsci updated the issue as the term, the meaning of the term. There was no longer a time between different command givers, but the time between two different systems, strategies, of ways of doing things properly in our joint shared life. We are now in the period of interregnum. What is period of interregnum? Period of interregnum is period of, anxiety, uncertainty, surely, but also period of experimentation. We are in a mood to experiment. And experimentation is aimed, in my view, mostly, that's the common denominator of all experiment, is aimed mostly on devising alternative tools, alternative instruments of effective collective action. The trust in established institutions to do just that is rising, is growing. Is falling. Trust is falling. It's not the crisis of one or another political camp. It is the crisis of the totality, so to speak, of political system. It was well fitted to act, to resolve social problems under certain situations, which, however, does not exist any longer. We don't have institutions which would be able to transform our wishes, our preferences, our postulate into the genuine and effective action. I would call the situation the crisis of agency. When I was a young person, like most people here in this room, we quarreled, as always young people quarreled. We had different views, what needs to be done. But on one topic, I don't remember we quarreled ever. That one topic was who is going to do it. We were all absolutely sure that if only our views prevail, then of course the state will do it, because the state had power and politics to do just that. That's by the way why it's difficult to compare, as very many people did, but wrongly, I think, the recent economic crisis, collapse of banks, collapse of credits, with the crisis of the end of 1920s, beginning of 1930s, simply because at that time, people, it seemed they knew very well who is the guilty one, what to do, not what to do, but who is going to do it once the proper policy, the proper politics is voted in and imposed on their action. The state will do it. The consequences of that were variegated, to say the least. On the one hand, there was a rise of two most awesome, atrocious, totalitarian states in history. But not only to them, not only in their actions, they believed, the widely shared belief, that state is omnipowerful, that it can do whatever is on the agenda, went far beyond the totalitarian states. Roosevelt in America introduced New Deal. The ideas of Martin Keynes were spreading and accepted that it is the task of the state and the task which can be performed by the state to secure full employment for every member of society, every member of national community, and keep economic life going. And finally, after the Second World War, as you know, all over Europe, the idea of welfare state was taking ground. Everywhere the idea was created. Well, as far as Germany is concerned, it took root very, very carefully, cautiously, already under Bismarck. But after the Second World War, it became the major principle of the state organization. What is this principle? The principle was that the state, or rather community organized into political state, is obliged and is able to ensure every citizen against misfortune, against individual catastrophe, against individual misery, individual inability to find place in society, and so on. Can and is obliged at the same time. It was based on the belief that the state is able to do it. This belief, this trust, to a very great extent evaporated by now. Of course, it doesn't mean that nation state is completely impractical, unable to influence human life, but it is a fact that every government, however strong, however powerful, however reasonable, is acting under double bind. Onto two contradictory pressures coming from two opposite sides. One bind is the obligation of the government towards its electors. Every government to stay in power has to listen to the demands, to the desires, to the dreams of the citizens, and even occasionally promise them that if they are elected, if they stay in power, they will do something to implement their expectations. Okay, but on the other hand, there are stock exchanges, there are global trade, global traveling of finances without much restrictions. There is global terrorism, there are global weapon traffic, global drug traffic, global criminality. All those global forces are united in one respect. They all neglect the local preferences, the local laws, and the local idea of order. If they don't like it, they are just packing their laptop and their mobile telephone and go elsewhere, where they will find surely a much more corruptible government and much more inclined to submit to their demands. So each government is acting under double pressure, which is virtually impossible to completely reconcile. It is maneuvering between the two programs which cannot be square, cannot be at the same time implemented. Now take, ladies and gentlemen, Europe. Well, in case of Europe, we should speak, I think, about triple bind, not two. Over the nation state, there is still the entity, political entity, combined of the policy without politics, which is conducted in Brussels, and politics without policy, which is conducted by regular meetings of head of the governments of European, of members of Europe. But there is another force over there. And it is ambiguous force. It depends from which side of the of the string of mutual dependencies you look. From the point of view for an insider, Europe is a sort of a fifth column, acting on behalf of this mysterious, frightening, horrifying sometimes, terms of trade, global forces. No one is able to predict what they are going to do. They may make all sorts of pranks. We are afraid, because of our own ignorance of their activity, we are afraid of what they might yet do. And European institutions, because they have to reconcile somehow the demands of the population of Europe to the pressures, to the realities, somber realities of international or rather global relations, now they are seen as the fifth column sent inside Europe to convey the will of strangers, of foreigners, of alien people, of forces which should not really should become accountable to the human will, to the citizens' will, but they are not. But they are not. They are on their own and subject only to their own interest. But if you look it from the other side on the same situation, Europe presents itself as a huge laboratory in which new ways of action are experimented with. And some of them are put in operation, some of them are working, some of them are not working, as you well know from newspapers, from television, but nevertheless, the search for such new ways of dealing is going on. It's a double role of European Union. On the one hand, it serves as a dustbin to which these problems, very difficult problems produced on the global scene are dumped, dumping grounds. And well, for example, just to give you offhand the most spectacular example, I think, the massive migration of peoples around the world, which ends up in every country by incoming immigrants, changing the landscape, changing the mutual relations between people, requiring extra expenditure, things like that, but promising also a new invigoration, so to speak, to local economy. Now, this migration is caused not by the invitation sent by the accepting countries, accepting political institutions. The migration is product of these politically uncontrolled global forces. The modern way of life, ladies and gentlemen, is chronically, endemically producing redundant people whom the changing economic situation inside the country cannot actually accommodate, cannot provide for them the position in society which is equal to their capabilities of performing a human role, being a human, living a human life. The causes of migration go far beyond the boundaries of a particular country affected. On the other hand, however, resolve this issue, find resolution, accommodate people, create new jobs, create new schools, create new hospitals, and engage in developing the very difficult art of dialogue with people of different views, different traditions, different languages, and so on. That is the task of the local people. We are expected now to find, with the instrument which we have at our disposal, we are expected today to find local solutions to globally produced problems. And that is, again, a very uphill kind of task, if at all fulfillable. So the search for new ways goes on, for the exit from interregnum, from finding alternative ways of doing politics, which will create somehow shortcuts between citizenship will, citizenship images, visions of good society, good life, and the realities of cohabitation within a country. There are few which I would like to bring to your attention. There's no time to discuss them in any detail, but they all suggest a rethinking and rephrasing and, in a sense, altering the idea of citizenship. Well, one, which I would like to start, he wrote it in English, so he didn't use the word I'm going to use, but it is Benjamin Barber, the American political scientist, and he suggests what can be only described as returning the idea of citizenship, Bürgertum, to its original source, which was the category of Bürger. Bürger, the resident of the city. Benjamin Barber suggests in his study under provocative title, I wonder whether it was translated into German or not yet, but it is universally available, universally debated, under the title, If the Mayors, the Bürgermeister, if the mayors ruled the world. He suggests that city, big city, and mind you, ladies and gentlemen, you know probably that for the first time in the history of humanity, a great and growing majority of human beings live in cities all over the world, not just in Europe, but in developing world as much the same. Their condensation in cities is even greater than it is in Europe. Return to the city. Why to the city? City as the basic cell, so to speak, of political organism. Because the city is of the right size and of the right density of the population to bring together the valors of the two types of social reality which Ferdinand Tönnies described already in the 19th century. Well, he thought that they are replacing each other, but then came Victor Turner and represented them as two aspects of the same, equally indispensable for fully fledged, complete human life. One Gemeinschaft, another Gesellschaft. City is a place, because of the size and density of the population, able to combine these two things. The feeling of socializing with the totality of the place which you identify yourself with. The city may be big, but it is still embraceable by your eyes, embraceable by even your activity, by your action. You may plan your life within the whole of the city, something which is very difficult to achieve in case of what Benedict Anderson called the imagined community of the state. State is a big thing. There are so many people, you have no chance whatsoever to meet them, particularly in the era of internet, when the chances are that you don't stay within boundaries of your country, but sooner rather contact people living far away from you, providing they repeat what you are thinking, and they agree with you, and do not make any trouble. It could be one could identify himself or herself with the city much easier than with any other political or social entity. And not only identify psychologically, not only identify emotionally, not only call himself a Berliner or a Hamburger or Frankfurt or whatever, it is the question of undertaking actions collectively, cooperatively, actions which results are to be seen, will be seen directly. Not you learn from the stories the professional journalists tell you about, but you learn from your own sight, from your own hearing, when you walk the streets of the city, and you learn and you see there is an evidence how it is changing. Well, another ideas which are developed currently by Richard Sennett. I hope his name is also known to you. In the 2 volumes of the intended 3-volume long study, the 2 volumes are dedicated respectively, one to craftsmanship and the other to the idea of togetherness, cooperation. Very interesting books, debating things which we very often considered already bygone, the marks of bygone times of old societies, which are not with us any longer. For example, Gabriel Morse, the famous, in his time, French sociologist, anthropologist, ethnographer, wrote a book about gift based on the study of primitive societies of that time. And it was generally accepted in the whole of sociology, in the whole of social science, that what he was talking about the culture of gift, culture of giving rather than taking, considered that as the characteristics of the pre-modern primitive society. That it applies also to our life, that there is a huge, very often covered up, invisible exchange of gifts which sustains every society, even in our society, but stifled, fought against by commercialized markets, by consumerist markets. Now, that fact somehow eluded the attention. Sennett calls us to bring it to our attention again. If you do, then the concept of citizenship, will take completely different color, and will require quite a good deal of rethinking, and then, in the consequence of rethinking, also a practical innovation. Well, that is roughly the handful, really, of alternative propositions to what to do. One thing is, however, seems to be, however, clear, that the idea of citizenship since its modern beginnings was orientated toward the state. It was the state versus the citizenship. Citizenship, the content of citizenship, the meaning of citizenship was defined in terms of relationship to the state, just how much we are engaged in the daily workings of the established political system, how much our voice matters, how much we are listened to, what sort of influence we might have, and what in reward we receive from the state, what sort of services state offers us. Now, citizenship is all these people. I mentioned only very few of them. There are other very interesting books which need, I think, to be studied very carefully today. They are suggesting detachment of the idea of citizenship from the entity of the state. Citizenship does not necessarily expresses itself in relationship with the established political system. It may express itself in a much more influential, far-reaching, seminal, consequential way at the lower level, at the level of local community, at the level of cooperatives which people enter, local initiative, neighborhood initiatives, involvement in this sphere of life which recently, when came under crisis, Putnam famously described American society in which people are going bowling, the national game in America, alone, not any longer in company. I call it, in a very awkward term, lonelification. Individualization, in other words, just pushing people, pushing individuals to become some kind of Leibnizian monarchs, just enclosed in their own interests, in referencing their action to one's own interests and one's own welfare. The question of expanding, of reversing the trend of individualization, of discovering again the wonders, the beauty, the moral quality, but also the joys of cooperation, of craftsmanship, of happiness derived from the job well done, happiness derives from not so much from what you withdrew from society on your latest excursion to the shopping mall, but what you brought and put into the society of people with whom you cohabit. Well, I am risking to end. I am risking really risky statement. I was talking about Europe, about putting emphasis on European situation above all. And I think that I wrote about Europe, that from the beginning it was a kind of utopia, but it was an active utopia. The real, genuine, full unification of Europe was never accomplished. But always or most of the time, it was a vision, a perspective, which was invigorating very many actions on the territory of Europe. I think it remains an active utopia, which is struggling to coalesce and consolidate the otherwise disconnected multi-directional actions. But how active that utopia will turn to be is not determined by technology, it's not determined by past history, it's not determined by a command from above. It will depend ultimately on its actors. That means on all of you. Thank you.